All right, welcome back from the break. As we have noted, we are just a little bit ahead of schedule so far. That doesn't mean we're going to continue that way for the rest of the day. But can we just, I'd just like to flag that we have an any other business segment at the end of our agenda today, for which we have tabled the approval of the technical committee members on human rights pending the full complement of our membership for that discussion to take place. So that's on the any other business. We don't have any other items that have been raised for AOB. I have an administrative AOB that we'll do in a private session once we've closed out the public session. But I want to just make sure that we're not missing anything. And if anyone does want to raise anything, you don't have to say what it is right now, but just so that we have some understanding of how long that session might take. If anyone has anything else to add to AOB, please, if you could let me know one way or another beforehand, that would be great. Does anyone have complications with flight times or departure times? Julia, I know you have to leave a little bit early, half an hour or so early. Is anyone else complicated by their departure times? Good. Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. I think that's all I wanted to do on that housekeeping. We now, having looked at the 2017 to 2019 work program and what we set out to accomplish in that document, and taking stock of what we have done, what we haven't done, what we'd like to do now is to look at the proposed additional projects that have been put to us in one way or another, and to think about how we prioritize things from this point. Bastian, would you like to walk us through that a little bit?
Yes, and additional refers to those projects that we're currently not committed to. Some of them have been on the work program but haven't been started. Others are emerging from the discussion in the last 2 days. So just to give an overview, and we will reshuffle that in a moment on a second slide. So it's the development of sector-specific contents, it's participation in initiatives and projects to improve the quality, develop new guidance for specific groups of reporters, and collaborate with key partners. This is part of the work program, but things that we would need to discuss what exactly we want to do here. And then additional activities that have come up in this meeting is guidance on report content definition, materiality, boundary, as one of the main issues flagged in the monitoring and the feedback that we're receiving. Report quality and assurance, the discussion and input that we had with Tim. SDGs, importantly, and how your work relates to that. The TCFD input yesterday, and the engagement with policymakers, regulators, stock exchanges as a follow-up item as well. If you reshuffle this a bit, I've regrouped this, and maybe this is the moment to talk a bit more in detail about the sector-related contents as well. I think from a standards division perspective, we see the development of the sector-specific content, that question of guidance on report content definition, materiality, as well as SDGs as kind of interrelated. Maybe just, again, the background of the sector-specific contents. We have very consistent feedback and also evidence just from the uptake of GI's core product that report preparers tend to gain from more guidance towards what are the specific impacts that they should be covering in their reporting. One easy way of indicating that is for those industries where we have sector disclosures, we have comparably high uptake across the board against all other industries. Another, I think, indication of it is that throughout sector supplements were basically review of sector supplement was discontinued in 2013, and these contents are still popular, besides the fact that they haven't been updated and people draw on it, and you've seen also the inquiries about it. So there's a real market demand for these contents. But I think most importantly right now, new developments in that space that we haven't really discussed in great detail was what Tamara brought to us yesterday in terms of the struggle of organizations to understand what is the spectrum of impacts they should be reporting on. The general struggle with the different focus of our reporting exercise compared to traditional corporate reporting, but added to that, then also once this is understood, so what is it that is should be reported? And we have an interesting dynamic because a lot of the reporting practice develops through peer pressure or collaboration among peers, and if an industry collectively runs in the wrong direction through that dynamic, you have a problem as well. And I think that's one of the things that we're observing at the moment, since there is not a good understanding in some industries of what are the main impacts across economic, environmental, and social issues. Then you see the whole industry struggling with that question. And I think it is also there where we see very positive signals from industries that have come together and have agreed a set of issues that they want to cover collectively regarding their responsibilities in the economic, social, and environmental domain. And they have structurally better reports than others. And they're probably more in line with the expectations set out in the GI standards in the first place. So that there is an important role to play here, I think is pretty clear just from these type of indications. The other interesting thing is also, if you look at the work that TCFD is doing, the work that SASB is doing, probably the work that CDP will be doing or is doing on right now in focusing on sectors. All of these sector-related inputs, which can be used in conjunction with the GI standards, and we deliberately decided last year to build the standards, the form and structure of the standards in a way that you could draw on other indicator initiatives, frameworks, and build them into your GI standards reporting. But they all adopt the traditional perspective. They all focus on financial materiality, and they're bringing some of the sustainability issues into the mix, but certainly not all. So we're falling short of this overall consideration of impacts in their totality as they are relevant to sustainable development. And that's the link that we see also with the SDGs. So Tim was alluding to the fact that this week, together with UN Global Compact, GI is issuing research documents and guidance documents around the SDGs and how to use established reporting approaches to also be responsive to the SDGs. There are a number of content elements that will be flagged, I think, later in the year by as an outcome of that project to you in terms of gaps that exist in the GI standards vis-a-vis the goals set out in the SDGs and things that you might want to consider for your future programming. That's one aspect of it. But more importantly, I think where the discussion ended with the advisory committees that were set up as part of the project, which are combined membership of UN Global Compact and GRI, and then interested stakeholders, including regulators, civil society, and so on, they seem to all go in the direction that sector-specific guidance is actually needed, because it is really the sector lens that helps you to interpret what's relevant for your business vis-a-vis the SDGs. So there's another input that we have that points to the importance of these contents. And then again, existing sector approaches fall short of actually addressing sustainable development in its totality, and certainly sustainable development as it is set out in the SDGs. So I would also group that as one of the market signals that we have around the importance of these sector contents. But let me just go back to refresh a bit your memory around what we have discussed in the past about sector contents. One thing that we observed was that in the new format and structure of the standards, what is really important is to get the topics right that you're reporting on. And maybe in the first instance, that's the most important guidance that we can give to reporters. So a good description of what likely material impacts are from a GI's perspective, from the scope of GI reporting's exercise. And as an input to the materiality definition process, because, and that point was raised earlier today, we have now universal standards, in particular a management approach related component. And these tend to be the things that are possible to report in the first place for many of the issues anyways. What we said last year when we were discussing it, maybe it is actually in the first instance most important to focus on issuing through our multi-stakeholder process, actually lists of likely material issues from a sustainable development perspective for consideration in a materiality exercise, and don't immediately move to devising disclosures, but just a good description of subject matters that should be considered, including the different viewpoints of stakeholders as an input to the materiality exercise to widen the scope of these type of exercises. What then, I think, in next steps of this process could be an activity of the GSB is to say, okay, there seem to be a couple of issues that are not covered by the GRI standards right now, and we want to elevate them as separate standards. A good example is what Tim brought to you yesterday with conflict minerals. I think it started off with 1 or 2 industries. Now it is stretching at least 5, if not 10 industries where it is becoming highly relevant. A great example for an issue that probably deserves attention in the medium term and could actually be a separate standard. There are elements of managing this conflict-related aspects that probably could be galvanized into disclosures. That is a discussion to be had. But in the first instance, what sectors would profit from right now is probably assistance from GRI in terms of flagging up conflict minerals might be material in your particular sectors. And this is an understanding of how stakeholders look at these impacts. These are materials that are available for you to understand the impacts, because I think we heard today again that this is also one of the common struggles to perform impact assessment that are entity specific is a very resource intensive exercise. But on the other hand, there are very many commonalities within industries or certain business models, and a lot of research exists also outside the corporate domain with stakeholders that point to impacts, and these could be used as an input to the exercise. So in short, I think the sector contribution that we would envision and as a first step would really be leveraging the multi-stakeholder process to bring about lists of likely material issues. And maybe in a second step then the consideration whether individual standards need to be built out. But that would be addressing a couple of the feedbacks that we are hearing. More guidance on materiality, a sector-specific lens to the SDGs, and certainly also filling that void that all of those perceive now, and we had that discussion yesterday about that, what is happening when you phase out G4, the sector contents are just no longer there, and that is a gap that is very real for very many of our followers.
Okay, so on this particular subject of the sector contents, the board is meeting next week. As you've heard, there's been a proposal made as to the budget allocation for the standards division, which does not allow us to move forward on sector contents. It seems to me that, I mean, that's a very helpful sort of summary of where we're seeing the demand and the nature of the demand for sector contents. But it would seem to me that if we wanted to make a case to the board that this must be higher priority than it obviously is right now, because it's not possible for us to take it up, we may very well need more specific and detailed kind of evidence as to the volume of the queries, the nature of them, is there a cliff edge that we're facing with respect to the drop-off of the G4 contents in a few short months' time, I would point out. What's the risk to GRI of not doing it? I mean, I think for this group, you know, we're very much focused on the kind of technical robustness of what we're putting out there, and really, our ambitions are as big as the resources that would be made available to us. So obviously, you know, we would always kind of tend towards arguing that, you know, of course we need to do more of any given thing, because there's so much to be done in the sustainability reporting standards area, and all of it is important. I feel like we either have to decide, actually, yes, this is greatly important to achieving the overall aims of our work plan and the success of the standards, or we have to say, it's one of many things we wish we could do it. Obviously, we're not going to be able to do it in the envisioned near-term future. Can we have some discussion about this among the, Julia?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, Judy. I mean, I think there are some sectors where the expectation to have sector-specific guidance is pretty strong. When I think about maybe if I was an airline or I worked in an oil and gas company, you know, typically and with other standard setters, you see them going to certain sectors like those sort of first in the list. But coming from a sector that is, you know, Nielsen as a company is hard to sort of pin down, and so we don't typically get any sort of sector-specific guidance. So for my personal experience, the sector-specific piece of the universe of reporting hasn't been something that I've used as a resource or felt like we really needed. But I'm conscious of the fact that perhaps other sectors feel differently about that. So I don't know if that is a question for the stakeholder interviews for corporate reporters specifically with an eye to that, or maybe it's a question for the GRI stakeholder community or council. But I just don't know how to prioritize it given that, at least my experience.
Kirsten.
First, a question to you, Judy, to something you said about we're not being allowed by the board to work on the sector supplements. Is that we don't have the resources, or are there any?
It's nothing to do with being allowed. It's that we do not have a funding allocation that would allow us to do anything other than what we are currently doing right now.
Thank you for that clarification. Then back to the need of sector supplements. I think that the Standards Department did a great job a year or two ago on mapping the standards and mapping mapping the sector supplements and making an alternative proposal for way forward on the sector supplements in a matrix format, which I think could be very useful. That would, of course, require quite some work by reviewing the current sector supplements to standardize them, since the same indicator can be in different formats depending on which sector supplement we are talking about, without that being material differences. I'm coming from one of those companies that certainly have are using, and really it's good for us to use the sector supplements. We are not only using one, we are using two, or 1.5, if I should say it like that. And the ICMM actually has it as a requirement to their members to use the metal and mining sector supplement. With the transformation to the standards, there will of course be a gap there, or a perceived gap for some companies. For us, it was easy to include the G4 sector supplement into the standards reporting, but still, I do realize that needs a certain level of competence in doing that.
Yes, just a short comment. As a representative from the chemical industry, I could say that for us, sector-specific guidance from GRI would be nice to have, but not needed, because then if I had it, I would face the issue on one side aligning with our own materiality analysis, and on the other side aligning with the sector guidance. I would consider that a bit more complicated.
I can't really talk about the chemical industry, even though I have been reporting also for the chemical industry earlier. But what is the most important thing about the sector supplements today might be that they include certain disclosures and and indicators that are not covered by the GRI standards today. So it helps also for the materiality process to identify what could be relevant topics for a certain industry. It does not mean that all sector supplements would be fully compliant with what should be material to that specific, to all companies within that specific industry. But it definitely fills a gap.
Sulema.
I was remembering why we've included the sector's issue within priority, as a priority in our work plan. In the very beginning work of this group, we've been talking about the competition with SASB, right? And SASB does have this approach on sectors. And besides the feedback provided by stakeholders, by reporters, I really think that's a big issue to continue to revise and to issue the sector's supplements when possible. So I was thinking about what you've asked us to help to build up a case for the board to get the funding. It's mainly because we are on the risk of being outdated without this piece of work. This is mainly because it's a very, very well-established trend on reporting. The companies are getting better guidance on what to report on by sector supplements. So this is, for me, the main reason why we should apply effort and resource on this piece of work.
Evan.
Oh, well, I'll just say, I don't know that I would use SASB and the competition with SASB as justification for allocating budget for sector analysis. I work with a lot of companies who are profoundly dissatisfied with the guidance that I got in the sector-by-sector analysis by SASB. So it's a long and thankless task to try and create these indicators for each industry that are equally applicable. I think GRI has focused on some industries that are historically problematic, and that probably the guidance is very relevant. But to think that this signals a shift for GRI to cover every industry and every sector, I just don't know that I would go down that road, because that seems too complicated.
Apologize, I didn't make myself clear. In the very beginning decision-making process, this so-called competition with SASB was raised in order to define the previous working plan. So it's nowadays, I'm pretty sure that they are not competitors to us, but I mean, it was the foundation of the first decision about this issue.
I mean, it seems to me that, oh, I'm sorry, Kirsten, you want to get it back in?
Just one more thing. This is not for me only about competition with SASB. This is also, so sorry. This is also about materiality, and the SASB approach is very different from how I see the sector supplements, because the sector supplements, they are still under the materiality principle and should be under the materiality principle. But they could be useful guidance, and they could, as I said, add to those holes in the standards as they are now are.
Robin.
Yeah, I think we should at least consider reviewing the sector work in light of the clarification on materiality that was made with the release of the standards. So the emphasis on impact, I'm not entirely sure if Bastian, you might comment, if all of the sector supplement material that's available still now and that we're saying can be still used was developed, overtly around that particular lens or not, and I think we need to at least clarify that.
Bastian, before you do that, it seems to me that part of the problem that we're having in this conversation, I feel, is that the sector contents are actually potentially various, and the things that we do under the standards or the sector's banner could be we could do small discrete projects, or we could do an enormous thing that could take an awful lot of resources. And maybe what we really need to do is to spend some time just spelling out kind of practically what might be contained in the work plan specifically if we were to want to, try to pursue any of this, and then we can make some decisions about what's a short term, what's an easy win, if that's important to us, what's really going to take, and yet is that going to be the thing that really sort of delivers value to our users? I don't know, but we have to kind of I think know a little bit more practically about what we're looking at.
I think if I go back to discussions that we had last year and the year before that, I think what was said in the discussions is you could run that as a pilot, and we've downsized expectations quite significantly. Also to Evan's point that probably don't want to go down the road of SASB saying we just in 2 years churn out very detailed disclosure guidance across 70 plus sectors. I admire that type of work just for plowing through it, but there are certain, I think, shortcuts that you need to take to arrive at an outcome in such a condensed time frame, and we don't want to do that. We cannot do that with our due process, and it's probably not the right thing. So one thing that I could offer is to have a look again at whether there is a possibility to follow up on the earlier discussions and propose kind of a pilot to focus on just even fewer sectors. I'm just acutely aware that from our direct engagements with stakeholders, we have a pretty broad followership, and there are at least 20 sectors that are waiting to have guidance. So when we go out and say we would tackle one, then the response will be, that's a nice initiative, but are you actually living up to that commitment that you made, that you have the global common language? And I think that's is that expectation that we're seeing increasingly. So also with regulators and others, that they say, so what's the next step there for you to become more specific? And that's something we see very acutely. We have, to also go back to your earlier point, Judy, I think a lot of the evidence that we're producing here is a bit anecdotal, and yes, we have some stats also. I can tell you probably the number of inquiries we receive about sector disclosures. I can tell you about the number of attendees in launch events that have asked about and pointed out that they wanted to know more about that. But in the end, I think we also have to rely a bit on the judgment of all these trends. Yeah, I think the team, just from our engagements, we feel that there is definitely something to be done on this guidance on report content definition. And one of the main struggles in that is really an understanding of what is set out in the materiality principle. What would that actually entail for a company to be responsive to that materiality definition?
So I mean, just to sort of pull that thread out a little bit further, the monitoring program has shown us, among other things, that there are significant challenges around the materiality principle and around topic boundaries. We see, poor decision making essentially in existing reports using the standards around those various principles. We believe, we are of the opinion that having a blank sheet of paper when you're trying to apply very complex concepts like that is a very difficult place to start for many, many reporters. We are also of the opinion that this would probably be simplified to some extent, improved as far as the outcomes, the quality of outcomes are concerned, if there were a more widely accepted sector-based approach that would replace the blank sheet of paper. This is a bit of an impressionistic sort of judgment that we're trying to present here. However, it is very much aimed at quality of reporting, which we know to be a very high priority for GRI broadly, as it is for us as an organization. I'm trying to get to where we can really point to a set of arguments that make a robust case around something that we know is going to solve a known problem that's shared across the firewall, as it were, that's going to be sort of doable, and that isn't going to be, as big as as big as you like it to be, but is going to be as big as it needs to be to do the job, right? So it's sort of we're maybe kind of edging our way there, but it still feels a bit woolly to me. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the issue for me, I think, is that, is this a little tweak we're going to do to these, to the sector guidance, or is this kind of a rewrite because we want to go back and make sure that we haven't missed some item that's material? And, so that's sort of the scope of the project. Is, Kristen said, for instance, she can use the sector guidance that exists right now, and maybe in those sector guidance, the material items have come to the surface already, and maybe the standard just, I just don't have any sense of it, and I guess I would ask for your judgment on that, Bastian.
I think one thing we need to say, and that was the reason that they're no longer required about the sector supplements or sector disclosures under the standards, is that they probably across the board, with very few exceptions, they are outdated. It's 5 to 10 years ago that these things were discussed. I think they were discussed, to Robin's point, in the exact same framing, sustainable development, and it's broader than what initiatives like SASB have produced. In that sense, they're pointing to a broader range of impacts. But I believe that, again, with few exceptions, and the ones that we probably completed last are still closest to best practice, we would have to reopen that and relook at that. And I think one dynamic that we've seen in the past with these contents was also to develop disclosures that are specific for a certain sector that was on the menu at the point in time, and we've created actually similar disclosures with similar intent through a range of sectors, and you would actually now be able to ask the question, are these things that we elevate into the GRI standards? And the sector guidance really mostly consists of a review. Okay, there's 30 plus topics covered in the GRI standards. These tend to be the ones that are likely material in your particular sector. Here's more guidance to understand the impacts that might make these things material for your sector. And if it is really needed, and there are some things right now in mining and metals and oil and gas, for example, that are shared, these could be standards that are then developed on a topic level because they are applicable to multiple sectors. That's I think where we are in the analysis. Maybe just one more so, because I think what we're circling around is a bit, so is there strong enough evidence from the report preparers that this is really needed? We have all these anecdotal elements, and would it be helpful to do some outreach around that with the membership of GRI, with a certain group? That could be done relatively easily and in a time-efficient manner. It wouldn't help us with the board discussion next week necessarily, but maybe that's also to inform. We haven't done that structurally. We are really relying on the conversations that occur as part of other processes. But what we've not done is we have not gone out to, let's say, the 500 members and the 280 or whatever reporters in that, and to say, if you had to prioritize, is it that this the next thing to do or not?
So I want to let Dwight get in with his comment, but just to kind of slightly refine that, I would also want us to be quite clear and specific about what we mean by this. Mm-hmm. We can do a limited exercise around the SDGs, for example, on a sector basis that's simply mirroring the conversations that are going to happen anyway around that. We could do the lists of likely material disclosures that were created around G4, if memory serves. And just sort of revisit those and see what needs to be transferred or whatever. There's the full standardization of the existing G4 sector supplements, and then potentially the creation of additional standardized sector-based materials for sector supplements that don't exist already. And those are, off the top of my head, those are things we can do to sort of really test that concept. Dwight.
Well, anything I could say is intended to reinforce many of the ideas that I'm hearing from Bastian. And I'm thinking that, well, first of all, it is true, the sector supplements that exist are out of date, and they are quite old. And moreover, I think they were developed in a time when some of the issues were not fully appreciated, and also where there was sort of a very big emphasis on GRI reports being a collection of indicators, and I think that these sector supplements were largely pre even the first round of DMA. It was in that neighborhood or before that you saw them. So I think there's a justification that way, and what I would propose is that perhaps we can take what is sort of hanging out there in
Actually, it's very feasible and very cheap because the World Bank has issued, I think, almost 25 or 30 EHS guidelines that contains the main impacts of some sectors. So there's one EHS guidelines widely discussed by specialists, widely reviewed. There are at least 4 or 5 brand new. I can show to the staff the links.
So we've discussed that with them also.
So this is a really a better idea and cost effective in terms of timing, in terms of money to start with. Because it's very effective. I used to work with the EHS guidelines, even to help clients to better understand their impact, social mainly.
Just to comment on the cost effective, I would agree, and I think that's broadly speaking also the lines that we've set out in earlier discussions. It's definitely more cost effective to do it that way and to focus first on likely material issues and to rely to a large part on work of World Bank, many others in the space, but also SASB and so on. I think we wouldn't have to replicate a lot of things, but one thing that will be time consuming, and we're learning that I think each and every time we try to describe a subject matter with experts, is once you're sitting down and say this is the description of the impacts and of the different viewpoints, that requires resource, and it is not something that you do just like that. You will have to involve parties that lend support to these descriptions, and you can borrow again. You can there are lots of public pieces of work that where you could actually probably try to then borrow formulations that describe the perspective of certain stakeholder groups, but you would nevertheless have to engage them and follow that up. And the recent experience just with water, just the introductions to the water standard and the OH&S standard, these are discussions that are not, there's not like a 30-minute thing on the phone with an expert. They take days to fine-tune this wording. And if you just assume that there are maybe 20, 30 topics for some of these high-impact sectors, this requires time. And that's why I'm saying very, very positive about getting this started and everything, but there is a resource that we really need to put in place. And right now, with all the disqualifiers that I've given for staff capacity, we don't have the dedicated capacity to just start this, even just one. Yeah.
Okay, so let's not underestimate the size of the task. We're having a little trouble canceling one of the microphones over here, if that's something you can help out with. Little technical malfunction. Kirsten.
Yeah, that will be the last you hear from me today. It seems like I just lost my name tag. Just to explain a bit further on what the sector supplements can be about to those of you who are not really familiar with the sector supplements, is that they close some gaps that are, as I said before, that are not covered by the standards. In some cases, some sector supplements close a gap for that sector, which is actually a gap for many more sectors. For instance, emergency preparedness, which is covered by the electric utilities sector supplement, and that topic is, of course, just as relevant for the mining and metals industry, for the oil and gas industry, for the chemicals industry, and certainly for many more. Others in the mining and metals sector supplement, the one that is most top of my head, which could be useful for more sectors, is closure planning, which, as far as I know, is only included in the mining and metals sector supplement. So there are certain topics that at least we should go through and make sure that doesn't disappear from the GRI standards. We need to take care of those. And maybe they should not be as sector supplements. Maybe they should simply be as general topics. Then they will come up as part of the materiality process for each reporting organization.
Okay, I feel as though we should probably move on to some of the other items in the additional projects list. Bastian, do you feel like you have kind of enough to sort of go back to the team and give us some, make a forward proposal of one sort or another that we can really advocate for?
Yes, I think we can definitely do that. It is, for me, it's really coming down to the implementation and the resources, and that we have a fairly good idea of what should be. So we can set that out, and I think the timing I would like to discuss with you, Judy, probably after the meeting, just also in relation to upcoming other governance body meetings and everything. I think what I'm hearing, I think the majority of the members, if not all members, see the relevance of that work still. It is about how you articulate it and how much you can probably focus, limit the investment at the moment to get it started. But overall, there seems to be widespread support for doing more work in that space, and maybe around those lines, and also having a discussion more from a wider political or strategic perspective with the GI board. That's what we can do next week with them. Okay. Next issues then that have come up: participation in initiatives and projects to improve the quality of reporting. And again, this is report quality, including but not exclusively the discussion around assurance mechanisms and all of that. But what was brought to the attention yesterday by Tim is that there are now likely international processes, or one particular international process underway to devise assurance engagement guidance for non-financial reports. If that is really coming through, and if the IAASB decides to initiate a project like this, the main question is, should we get involved at this stage? And I think Tim's input was that seems to be one of these developments that we should be close to. And I think just from a standards division perspective, that's the reason. It was actually written into the work program last year to monitor that space and see whether, in particular, that body would actually commence work. And last year, they had issued a discussion paper, which was not followed up, basically, for a year. But now they're revisiting that process. It's too early to say whether they move ahead with this or not. There's an ongoing discussion. But there seem to be market pressures around this that elevate this issue again with the major institution globally that has this mandate to develop content. And I think the other element that I would flag in that regard is currently, if we want to engage in these type of discussions, we need to hire an expertise that can help us to make a relevant contribution. While the team has a certain exposure to these discussions, I think we're by no means experts in the field. That was also never a hiring consideration in bringing the talent in that we have currently in the team. And it would require very specific expertise and also, I think, a certain level of reputation of an individual to sit around the table in these high-profile processes. We have the possibility to hire people for this specific function. And that's part of Tim's proposal to locate within the standards division actually an expert that could participate and has the right profile to participate in these processes. Last point about it is, I think from a GSB's perspective, we should always see that in context of report quality and not only assurance specifically. So if we go out and hire a senior member of staff for the standards division, I would want to co-locate a lot of our research and quality activity in a broader sense. So not only looking for a person that is strictly focused only on assurance, but have an understanding of how to run research projects and how to actually have discussions that are wider than just assurance regarding different initiatives that would contribute to report quality, because just focusing on that one avenue and one trajectory to push a report quality, I think that's not reflective of the discussions that you had earlier.
Dwight.
You know, the topic of assurance, at least for me, remains controversial. And I would like to think that our involvement in that, which I recognize has to increase, and we've all agreed on that, that we still take a broader approach of credibility mechanisms. And if you say, well, we're going to have somebody on assurance, then I can assure you that we're going to get somebody from perhaps the industry that wants to sell insurance. And I think that we want a broader kind of concept, even as we choose to get involved with assurance providers. So I would prefer we deal with the concept, even at this level, even at this slide, as credibility enhancement measures or something like that. And because I'm a little concerned that there'll be a self-fulfilling prophecy. If it's always assurance, then whatever the decision or outcome will be, it will be something about assurance. And assurance is already a word that has a meaning and an understanding. And I don't necessarily, and I still feel this way, that that's not always what we need. That's not always where the gap is.
Michel.
That's mainly to confirm what Dwight is saying. I think the topic of report quality and report assurance are in fact two different topics. And assurance is mainly driven either by legislative requirements or by stakeholders' pressure sometimes. I mean, we're in the chemical industry. If we don't verify what we publish, nobody believes us. Report quality, I want to reinforce that we've tested twice the GRI review service, and we're very satisfied with it. It goes far beyond just checking alignment with GRI standards. It's really a check of the report quality, generally speaking, even easy to read and aspects like that. And I think this is something that could be more emphasized by GRI, that there is a service that exists to check report quality.
Dwight, do you want to get in there again? No, okay. Yeah, and Michel, to follow up on what you're just saying and what others are saying here, if you go to Tim's presentation yesterday, there's the slide with the bar chart on it that envisages, the existing alignment services that the Secretariat provides already, going into enhanced alignment services, and then in the future, accreditation and services based on an assurance standard. This is laying out a kind of a development path that I would have a lot of questions about from a technical standpoint, as to what exactly is being asked of us as the standards board. At the same time, there's a lot to go to your point, Bastien, about if we do bring in a staff member into the standards division, not having a remit that is limited to just assurance. I mean, I think there's a lot in the discussion between the services that GRI carries out for fees, on the one hand, on the Secretariat side, and the creation of independently technical, robust content on the standards division side, and what exactly falls in between the two of them? How do we stay on our side of that kind of seesaw while allowing the other side to be kind of equally balanced and to sort of deliver the right sort of outcome, which in Tim's view is disclosure quality, improved disclosure quality. There is a lot in here that I don't feel like I really understand what the steps would be that would be implicated by going down this route. I think that we all around this table fully accept that quality of reports is a real issue, and we see it manifested in lots of different ways. We've just been talking about materiality and the topic boundaries and so forth. What specific quality problems would be solved by what specific programmatic activities carried out by what specific groups of individuals on either side of the firewall? It's quite nebulous in my mind at the moment, and I therefore am, I want to be supportive properly and provide, as full and fulsome, kind of public support to the drive to improve report quality. But as a technical person working with a group of technical people over here, I would really like to know what exactly we're talking about. And I don't personally feel that we have that yet, but I also don't know what the path is to getting there. I wonder if you, can you feedback at all, Bastien, on that?
Well, and not that I can share a lot of what it is that we are set out to do, but I think there is, and I think that's a change from earlier years, there is now this acknowledgement that GI has to be part of, if you will, the discussions around credibility mechanisms at large, and that the end goal of this is to actually make more of a contribution to enhance report quality. And credibility mechanism is one part of it, and there are other components, but that this has been identified as one of the hurdles to get mainstream adoption with decision makers that rely on the information. I think that is maybe just an evolution of earlier strategic direction, but now it is also just manifested in terms of, okay, let's bring people on board that can help us to declinate through what are the activities. And I don't think there is a set agenda. This is what the expectation is. This is more a commitment to bring people on board that help us work through this. And it is now the question for the GSB whether this is something that you would like to see located within the mandate of the standards division and your mandate to get started, or whether this is more something where you say, okay, that this seems to be more related to all the other activities of GI, and it should be located with the rest of the organization.
I mean, for me, thank you, but I mean, for me, it's a bit like the sector program in that I still don't quite know what this is.
Yeah.
And if I go back again to Tim's slide, you know, he was quite clear yesterday in saying that GRI will not carry out its data verification activities that he was clear GRI would not be carrying out. Assurance covers a broad range of topics that may not be data verification, and I don't know what's been ruled in and what's been ruled out there. And I would really like to hear a lot more about what this future vision is from 2019 around accreditation and services based on an assurance standard. And I think that's very much in the Secretariat's ballpark to provide.
Yeah, and I think it's as easy as asking Tim to actually have a discussion with you in one of the next calls, probably in October, to go into much greater depth on his perspective and what he envisions there. Again, I think there are all kinds of ideas that have been entertained, but really a set menu of activities, it doesn't exist. It is at this stage really the decision that this needs to be looked into with much more detail, and we lack the expertise currently in the Secretariat, including the Standards Division, to do that. And it's a commitment to bring these people on board to maybe facilitate the process that you are looking for. So what would that actually look like going forward?
And quite possibly here on the GSSB, we may consider that we lack the expertise on some of this. We are a reporting standards body. I think many of us know a lot about assurance from in one way or another, but that is if that is to be a major area of technical content going forward, we must make sure that we have the right people here to be able to do it. So, yeah. Any further kind of discussion, questions, feedback? Okay.
So I take it as an action point that we invite Tim for more discussion?
Yes.
Yes.
Let's do that, yeah. Okay, Bastian, do you want to go through H and G on the slide here?
So we've discussed collaboration with key partners, and you had the presentation of the TCFD, and I think what we're looking for right now is, having listened to the TCFD yesterday, whether there are any specific follow-ups that you would like us to scope out in the coming months. I think there is. The TCFD itself has done some work in understanding how their work relates to the GRI standards. We have assisted them with that. So in the background, we've done the basic linkage and all of that. But it is much more about going forward. Do we want to be out there and help GRI reporters on how they can make sense of this TCFD development in light of the GRI reporting exercise? Is that something that you would like us to explore further, and what are the parameters to do that? Is that a joint? Shall we strive for a joint activity with the TCFD? Is this just a document that we issue like other linkage documents with a GSSB label and we put it out there? Is there more engagement needed for that? Just based on the discussion we had yesterday with Wim Bartels, that will be what we are looking for in terms of feedback here.
I think it would be great if they could, if there could be a joint communique between the TCFD and the GSSB, and not just a kind of GSSB issued document. That's my Michel.
Yes, a short comment, because we will have to report on the TCFD alignment. Our Chief Executive Officer already committed to that. One of the ways we were looking at is precisely through the GRI Content Index. In the same way that we referenced the Global Compact, we could possibly reference the different TCFD, the 11 basic requirements that they have.
Anyone else? Any? Okay, well,
But is there agreement that this is a development we should be addressing? Because that was also still, I mean, if you look at the formulations and work program, you said, bring this back to us, we will look at it, maybe we want to get engaged, maybe not at all. But are we left with the impression that this is something we should be following up on or not? Because it has an implication for just the programming.
Yeah, I fully agree. I think it's really important. People are looking for GRI to be front and center on, here's what this means. And if this is TCFD, but in the future, sort of on a rolling basis as other developments happen. Certainly, I think reporters are looking for that guidance.
Yeah, I think there's probably also a timing question there, given where they're going with the sort of different industry or sector level sort of work that they're looking to do. So, sort of, do we want to sort of preempt that, or do we want to? Is that a good time for GRI to come in? So it's a timing question, but generally, aligning ourselves to that seems sensible.
I think our take, having worked with the team over there to just get the references into it and the final recommendations is probably it would be first and foremost on the generic level that Wim presented, because that's applicable to the broad set of GI report preparers. And then if we happen to start moving on the sector, I think this would be one of the very many inputs on to consider in terms of other specific subject matters that need to be highlighted as likely material.
Michel, did you want to get in?
Just saying that I support fully. First, as a reporter, second, as a member of the GSSB, I really think that is something that we should address. And if you need someone from the GSSB to be involved, since I know very well the GSSB documents, I've participated to all the consultations, read the draft, the full draft report, the final report, so I know the topic.
Always welcome. Note that, yeah.
Great. Well, that seems fairly straightforward, that one, I think. Unless anybody feels differently, that feels like that's one that there's a fair amount of consensus over. Okay. New guidance for specific groups of reporters. Is that where we're at now?
Yes, and I think there I would like to make a proposal based on what I said earlier. With the team, we discussed whether there is actually the need to develop anything right now based on the feedback we've received. We have always that notion of is that fit for purpose for SMEs, but we don't have an evidence base to judge that at the moment. We are experimenting as part of the grant programming that we have with governments. GI overall is doing that with SME reporting, and it's deliberately an approach where you work with SMEs on GI referenced reports. So just a couple of issues that are covered in a format that is not fully reflective of everything that is set out in the standards. But this will be 2 years into that programming that we have some first evidence whether this is a good proposition or whether there are specific feedbacks from SMEs that point us to modifications we would need to make to the offering, whether to make it more relevant to SMEs. Right now, we simply don't have the evidence base, and it is not something that we could establish an evidence base anytime soon, because there are too few SMEs that have started to use the GI standards. With other groups, not one that comes to mind based on the engagements we had right now. So if we had to, maybe we can still flag it up in the work program as something that we're following and we're evaluating based on feedback we're receiving, whether there are specific groups that we should be addressing, but I would otherwise park that part of the programming for now and put it on hold.
Okay. Should we, Bastian, should we spend a few minutes just sort of summarizing this discussion today to just get a little clear in everybody's mind as to how we're going to take this back and kind of attempt to gain some more clarity around things that we can incorporate formally into the work program and any implications on the existing work program that come out as a result of it. Are you able to reflect on that at the moment? Yeah.
Yes, so what I would try to do is I will try to summarize the discussion on a high level against the work program that is currently decided upon and in the public domain. So we will discuss.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I just, you know, you were talking about going to the board and, you know, budget allocations and so forth. And I guess it would, as part of this, it would be helpful to sort of understand that process a little bit. That is this sort of their annual budgeting moment, or is this something you go to ask for money for on a regular basis, or how does that work?
So what is set out in the due process is that there is an annual budget allocation. Actually, I think in the medium term we want to move something, and we've started it this year, also with an indication for 3 years ahead. And the budget allocation is decided upon just financial resources of GI overall, and things that we from the GSB put forward. And this year round, what we have put forward is a budgeting budget element that is covering all the work that you've committed to already. So the standard setting projects that are underway, where you have project proposals decided, and we basically costed that out over the next 3 years, as I have shown earlier, till the end of 2019. That is what went into the budget process as one component. There was also a component based on earlier discussion for the sector contents, and we said where we arrived earlier on it is probably about $500,000 that and we've put that forward as well. But an outcome right now is that there is not sufficient financial resource for GI to support that element. But at the same time, in the budget discussion, what came back is also, let's relook at this. Is that still relevant, both from a strategic as well as from a technical perspective? And that's the ongoing discussion there.
On top of which is the set of recommendations that have come from the chief executive to the GSSB about things that we might consider adding to our work program. And I think it's worth just sort of clarifying that this is this process of kind of debate and consultation between the GSSB and the GRI board is an interesting one. It's not obvious what the right way is to conduct these conversations in light of the requirements for independence that are put in place structurally through our due process, through the way that governance has been constituted across the piece at GRI. We have an independent process that is described in our due process for identifying our work program and for setting priorities based on our work program. It isn't simply a matter of our then going to the board and saying, here's what we're doing, let's have the money for it. There's a dialogue that takes place between them, because that's another sort of source of information for us about priorities. And there is simply the kind of reality that there's no magic money tree, and that, you know, by our nature, we would probably just continually expand the work program, expand the standards division, add more people, add more topics, add more projects, great. We would probably do that. We can't do that, and therefore we have to, you know, cut our cloth to suit our means. And this dialogue is something that is this is still a very new process under the current governance at GRI. So there's no formula. So, shall we try to do that? Should we do a bit of summation?
Okay, just going activity by activity or work area by work area again in the item 10. So I think what we said is, for supporting the implementation of the GI standards rollout related activities, this will not be highlighted in the next iteration of the work program, because we've concluded on this. For activities B and C, the review of the GI standards on a regular basis, what we're suggesting is to make this more specific to the commitments that you've made already, and that these are the projects that we had on a screen before. me just quickly go back to these here, and set that out also in the annex again to say these are the projects that you have committed to, with a note that currently we don't anticipate, based on resource availability, that we will be adding to these projects, and also qualifying that in particular human rights and economic related programming will branch out into the review of very many standards likely. So to explain to stakeholders that we're not just looking at 2 or 3 standards here, but potentially up to half of the standards that are currently under the umbrella of the set of standards in totality. For the element D, the sector-specific contents, I think based on what we've decided here is we are going back again to prepare for the discussion of the GSSB a more focused approach, acknowledging and probably pinpointing some of these feedbacks that we've received. At the same time also trying to build something that is efficient in terms of programming, and what we need to decide is whether or not, and we think about how we best do that, we can get more evidence from the market of what exactly the need is for this. But I think the general direction is still the same. It seems to point to giving a helping hand to organizations. That's the way it is set out here also under the in their report content definition, by explaining likely material topics. That seems to be the gist of this activity, and it's then more in the how you roll it out, what's the type of process, what's required, how many sectors do you cover, do you, as was suggested, do you work first with the sectors that are well established already, and importantly also that discussion that Kirsten has alluded to. There are some subject matters that are really unique to certain sector supplement or sector disclosure contents right now, and they could be elevated into and put on the conveyor belt for standard setting projects going forward and become part of the standard. So I think we could set that out for you for discussion. If not in October, then it would be in November. For E, the authoritative interpretations and guidance, I think the most important element is we need to continue to do this. We will continue to provide we will continue to respond to technical queries. We will continue to build the FAQ, but there is something about informing other channels that GI has established, including training partners, but also seeking direct contact with report preparers with these contents, so that we can actually course correct in a much more direct way reporting practice by just the things that we observe from the feedback that we're receiving. So lots of the issues that we've discussed with Tamara and that you've seen in the technical inquiries set out in the FAQs, we could communicate that more widely across the different channels. And I think that's an activity that I would reflect here as well. For participating in initiatives and projects to improve the quality of reporting, I think this is an ongoing discussion. If I had to summarize, I would say we need more of a discussion on that. We will invite Tim to join that discussion. Again, I would like to hold on to any resource that we can get hold of at the moment. So that's a discussion we will have to conclude fairly soon, because there is a lead time of months to get people in. So that's something that will come back to you in the October call, I think. Develop new guidance for specific groups, saying that we keep monitoring this, will be part of the work program, the new version, but not committing to a specific group right now, and maybe qualifying that also a bit, that the first year of implementation didn't lead to the identification of one particular group, and that's something we can say here. Collaboration with key partners, we have set out potential things to do here, and I think we can now give one specific activity, and that's the TCFD related one, and if there are other things emerging, we can add to that over time. Technical input on programs, products, and services. I think the descriptor is right here. We will, as I think as a standing item, bring back to you the activities that we're actually covering under this, so that you gain a better understanding and as a board of what kind of products and services are developed and what kind of feedback is sought from us at the standards division for these processes. And the last one, and I think that was Judy's point, is to say monitoring is kind of underlying very many of these activities, so maybe we don't make it an activity per se, but say that we continue to do this research to inform decision making for all these activities, and that's how I would propose to change that item. Anything else that we should be?
Could I suggest that we make a specific invitation to Tim to participate in our October
Absolutely,
virtual meeting?
I think that's the action item that we've taken. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks. All right. Any further discussion of this? I mean, Bastian, to what extent is the discussion that we've just had actually accounted for by and possible under the budget allocation that we've seen so far for the standards division?
I think the two components that are currently not in budget, and that's the sector-related work. Again, I would say even if we downsize expectations, and we would need dedicated staff to roll this out. And the other element is indeed around credibility mechanisms, report quality assurance. That piece we currently don't have the expertise. Mm-hmm. We have an offer to hire that in. So these are the two things. The rest we can cover. With the personnel that we have on board, but also importantly with the additional hires that are coming in. So I think the one thing that I would flag just from a programming perspective is it depends a lot on the success in hiring a deputy director to be able to continue with the same pace. Otherwise you will see things probably getting a bit slower. And I'm not referring to OHS&S and water, and I'm probably not referring to human rights, but for the rest of the things, you would actually see some delay for the standard setting projects. Yep.
Okay. Any further discussion of this? Thoughts, ideas, concerns? Okay. I mean, I think. You know, I'm sort of continually amazed at all the many things that the standards division is able to press ahead with at any given time, not just right now when we are a bit short-staffed. But I think I'd just like to conclude that discussion by thanking you, Bastian, and your colleagues on the standards division for, you know, having the ambition and the professionalism to kind of keep us on the right path with all of this. And I hope that our discussions about what we want to do don't just add to the burden, you know, but that add value and help us get to where we want to get to in the future.
So first of all, thank you for that. No, I think it's the contrary. It really helps us to just actually make decisions, and that's and focus activity. And I think the one of the things I think we discussed at the outset of the whole GSSB activity, it is a lot about standard setting, is a lot about signaling to the market what the programming is, so that people can prepare for what's coming and have a good idea of what they can expect from GRI going forward in terms of standard setting activities. And this is exactly what we're doing. We're becoming very, very specific. You have broader umbrella, I think, work areas, but under that we can now point to very specific projects and ways to engage on that. So that's very positive. Thank you.
Okay, at the risk of I don't know, bad luck in the afternoon, I would like to point out that we remain a few minutes, just a few, not a great many, a few minutes ahead of schedule here, I believe. And in fact, when we come back after lunch at 1:15, the first item on our agenda is the approval of the revised work program for public consultation. We've pretty much just completed that conversation. So if we may have to have a sort of a formulation of something on a slide, but I don't even know if we have to do that at this point.
No, I think what I would propose is that we rework the work program, and in the October call we just make that a formal resolution.
Okay.
And then so under the due process, we are not required right now to go out with this work program for a fully fledged 90-day public consultation. But what's probably good to do is to follow the exact same steps that we followed last year around, and inform the GI board, inform the SC, inform the DPOC, importantly, and also make the work program publicly available and invite feedback. And so that would be after the October call. The last item would be happening after the October call.
Okay, so in the October call, we'll then talk about what the public consultation process looks like, and how we sort of define the time period and what steps we'll take in order to gain that consultation. Okay. Okay, so then officially, I think we could probably dispense with item 233 at 1:15 and move straight into any other business following lunch. Yeah. So we, as I said, we have one AOB that has that we have already identified, which is the proposed membership for the Human Rights Technical Committee. And if there are any others that members would like to propose, please let me know over the lunch break, ideally, I think. Okay, so we'll close it out now. We'll come back at 1:15, 1 hour and 6 minutes precisely, and we will proceed swiftly to concluding our formal business at that point. Thank you.